I am a third generation Pentecostal preacher, so I'm going to be uncharacteristically brief. It is good to be in the South. I was raised about 7 hours from here in a little place called Zent, Arkansas. Had 11 houses. And I'm reminded of those simple people in Zent, Arkansas. Many of them couldn't write their names. Miss Roberta used to make her mark. And she said, "Come here, boy, and read to me about our people. Everything I know about being an intellectual comes mostly from folks who couldn't write their names." So I want to anchor myself there, that these people were in possession of a theological sophistication that is yet to be unpacked, that they were engaged in a profound theological project because they understood something that the existentialists have wrestled with in France. I am a bit of a Francophile. I spent a little time in Paris. I was just there a few weeks ago trying to explain to them at the Sorbonne what my grandmother was talking about, and that Sartre would have been a little better off if he would have spent a little time with her. So Sartre raises the question, why go on? My grandmother said, why not? Because she understood something about the world in which we were in. So the reason why they deployed certain kind of existential notions about the way in which they languaged Jesus. So they said things like Jesus is a bright and morning star. For the night of slavery was set against them, but they understood that there was a little light inside of there. So water in dry places and doctors in a sick room, while we often see them as a kind of cliches within the framework of African-American religious parlance, what they are doing is that they are rendering an understanding of the world that it might be dark, but the darkness will not have the last word. And in the midst of the darkness, they will sing a song. And so these old women and men who raised me, they would moan these hymns that had a kind of ontological value to them. There was a disruption, and when they sang, "I love the Lord, he heard my cry." And what they were doing was enter into a kind of cosmic understanding of the world, that their moans would move history. Now I currently pastor in New York City, in South Jamaica, Queens. My church sits at the center of the foreclosure crisis. Over 134 houses have been foreclosed upon. There are 145,000 families in our city council district. Not one community center, 3 libraries. 2 of them are going to be closed. And just a month ago, someone was shot in front of the parsonage. It would seem as though that these young people do not have access to the kind of spiritual weaponry that I was bequeathed by these simple people within Zent, Arkansas. And so by situating myself as a good existentialist, I want to lay bare a kind of frame, if you will, a kind of existential bookends by 2 of my soulmates. The great Albert Camus says that the artist must never side with those who are the makers of history, but rather those who are the victims of it. And James Baldwin, that queer black man who left the church, but the church never left him, who says that the artist must embrace that state of being that most humans must necessarily avoid, and that is the state of being alone. And so then, if we just simply replace those words, a kind of eisegesis on these existentialist texts, and say that the preacher must never side with those who are the makers of history, but rather those who are the victims of it, and that the preacher must embrace that state of being that most humans must necessarily avoid, that is the state of being alone. Who are we as a church? What are we supposed to be doing in the world? What do we do with our resources? How do we make our institutions more democratic? That it's not hanging just upon a charismatic leader. So the question is not how many you got in your house, Doc, but what are they doing? I got 50 people. 25 of them are over 70. 12 of them under 12. About 10, 20-somethings. And those 50 people are going to build a community center in that community because we're going to do small and deep work. That is the model for us. For us to reconceptualize the way in which we do church now, because the church is dead. We may be growing, but the megachurch movement is simply the recycling of members. They go from one church to another. It is not new converts. But it's about who has the sexiest thing right now. What is the most important now? Who's the most visible? What circuits are you on? But Jesus says, tell my disciples if they are looking for me. I'm going to be on the road to Galilee. I am going to Nazareth, where unimportant people are, where folks don't matter. And that our obligation as a church, what we are called to by the biblical mandate, that we must stand in solidarity with those who are catching the most hell. Our solidarity must not be with Eddie Long, but it must be with those 4 boys. Our solidarity must be with those men and women who are subject to sexual violence rendered at the hands of clergy. Our obligation is to stand with the 1 in 4 black men who are HIV positive in New York, the 1 in 3 who encounter the prison system at some point in their lives. That is who we are called to stand next to. That is who we are called to be with. This is what the indictment that hip-hop has consistently given to us. Tupac says that I hate the preacher because I know he's a liar. You ever seen a crack fiend? Now that's eternal fire. That is an indictment on a dead church. So our task within these concentric circles of an ecclesial, economic, ecological, and existential way of resurrecting our churches on the road to Galilee. And if we are willing to do that, they will say of you, and they will say of me, there stood a generation of men and women who believed in something bigger than themselves, and they were willing to give their lives. They will say of you, and they will say of me at a moment when there was homophobia was rampant in the world. We went and we stood with Tyler, that innocent boy who took his life at Rutgers because he had been exploited because of his sexuality. They will say of you, and they will say of me, that there were church people who walked with me through an abortion and sat with me and honored my right as a woman to have a kind of ethical consideration over my own body. They will say of you, and they'll say of me, well done, well done, well done.